Welcome to the Everyday Warriors podcast, the perfect space to speak my truth and dive into deep conversations with others. This podcast is about celebrating everyday warriors, the people who face life's challenges head on, breaking through obstacles to build resilience, strength, and courage. Join me, your host, Trudy Marie, as I sit down with inspiring individuals who have fought their own battles and emerged stronger, sharing raw, real, and authentic stories in a safe space, allowing you to explore, question, and find your own path to new possibilities. Let us all embrace the warrior within and realize that while no one is walking in your shoes, others are on this same path, journeying through life together. Please note that the following podcast may contain discussions or topics that could be triggering or distressing for some listeners. I aim to provide informative and supportive content, but understand that certain things may evoke strong emotions or memories. If you find yourself feeling overwhelmed or in need of support while listening, I encourage you to pause the podcast and take a break. Remember that it is okay to prioritize your well-being and seek assistance from trained professionals. There is no shame in this. In fact, it is the first brave step to healing. If you require immediate support, please consider reaching out to Lifeline on 13 11 14 or a crisis intervention service in your area. Thank you for listening, and please take care of yourself as you engage with the content of this podcast. Love the Everyday Warriors podcast? It would mean the world to me if you were to leave a 5-star review to ensure that the Everyday Warriors podcast is heard by more listeners around the world. You can also support the show for as little as $5 with a one-time donation or by becoming a monthly subscriber. Your contribution helps me to continue bringing you inspiring stories of everyday warriors who overcome challenges to find strength, resilience, and new possibilities in life. Head to the link to buy me a coffee and fuel the next episode. Every bit counts. If you're looking for an inspiring story of resilience, healing, and rediscovering yourself, then my book, Everyday Warrior From Frontline to Freedom, is for you. It is my memoir of hiking the 1,000-kilometre Bibbulmun Track, a journey that was as much about finding my way back to myself as it was about conquering the trail, through the highs and lows and everything in between. This book is taken from my journals and is my raw and honest experience of overcoming trauma and embracing the strength within. Grab your copy now. Just head to the link in the show notes and let's take this journey together. Welcome to another episode of the Everyday Warriors podcast. And today is another solo episode with yours truly. And today I'm going to be discussing how I dealt with post-traumatic stress. And I will just add, in case you skipped the trigger warning at the beginning, that if you feel like you need to stop at any time and seek support, then please do so. The other thing I would like to point out is that I like to say I have post-traumatic stress or have experienced post-traumatic stress as to saying PTSD with the disorder on the end. I don't believe it's a disorder. I believe it's just a delayed mechanism of how we cope and deal with stress. And it is not something to be looked at negatively. People do need the support and the help when dealing with any kind of trauma-related stress in whatever capacity that comes in. Now, I was diagnosed with complex PTS, and the difference here is that a lot of people think that post-traumatic stress comes from one specific incident. Like there was this really one big event in your life that caused the post-traumatic stress. Now, while that is true for some people, often for others, it is a series of smaller events that you continually to basically go through, and you never fully get over the first one before the second one comes along, and then another one, and then another one. And before you know it, you're caught up in this fight or flight, or even freeze, as what I do, with how you settle or regulate your nervous system. And it gets to the point where you are so dysregulated that you go into post-traumatic stress. And this is characterized by so many different things that it is different for every single person. And today I just want to talk about how I experienced it. So, as many of you would probably know, I had both operational and organisational trauma from my time working with WA Police. And I go into detail in this in my 8-part series. So if you haven't already listened to that, please go back, download those 8 episodes and listen to that in a stage-by-stage process. But ultimately, that level of stress was laid out to the medical board in an 11-page statement, which had me subsequently be retired from WA Police. And when I look back on it now, I believe if I had have had either the organisational trauma or the operational side of the trauma, I would have been able to recover from those and continue my career working as a police officer. But having both simultaneously was causing different issues, and almost like for me to spiral downwards, which ultimately led to not just having the post-traumatic stress, but I was diagnosed with being major depressive disorder, which is basically a really deep form of depression. And I also had really high anxiety and developed agoraphobia, where I couldn't leave the house, but I could also barely get out of bed because of the depression. So the first thing that probably really showed up for me was, especially with the operational side, was intrusive memories. Now, these are distressing memories, flashbacks, nightmares, or any kind of emotional distress related to that trauma. And for me, there were 3 major events that contributed to this. So the first one was a woman screaming, and I used to wake up from nightmares of hearing this woman scream, and it would just almost like it was happening right then and there, and I would wake up in a cold sweat. And that was the result of one particular job. The second one also related to a job I had attended, and it was this whole feeling of choking or being unable to breathe, of having restriction around my neck, and I would literally wake up short of breath. It was almost like coming out of that dream was stopping me from like choking in my sleep. It's really hard to explain, but it was one of those ones that would just wear me out. Like I was so tired and I would struggle to go back to sleep because it was just horrific for me to experience. And the third one was just this feeling of not being safe and getting assaulted. I would have many dreams where I would end up in some kind of precarious situation where I was getting attacked, and it's almost like you would wake up at that final point before something worse happened. And those kind of reoccurring thoughts and dreams, predominantly dreams for me, but they just were, it was almost like they were never ending, and I did not want to go to sleep. The next thing that's related with like trauma is avoidance. And I think in certain areas of my life, I tend to have some kind of avoidance anyway. People who know me know that I have so-called run away or, hidden away or changed jobs or changed towns or whatever to avoid certain things. So that's not an uncommon situation to me, but when you go to the point where you can't even talk about what was happening, like I couldn't talk about my dreams, I couldn't talk about the incidents, I couldn't even write the statement to the medical board and talk about all the stuff that had happened until after I'd been on the bib track. So this was a really big thing for me. I also couldn't avoid, sorry, I tried to avoid police stations, police officers, police vehicles. Like they would literally send me into some kind of anxiety or panic attack just by seeing, being around a station or seeing a vehicle, hearing a vehicle with sirens going, or seeing other police officers in uniform in public. I would literally be, I'm out of here, catch you later. The next thing was the negative changes and in your thinking and in your mood. And this is things like negative thoughts, feelings of hopelessness, any memory problems, detachment from like others around you, and a general lack of interest in activities. For me, this showed up initially when I think right back to the beginning was I was crying before every shift and after every shift. Like I would be in tears before I even went to work, and I would have to pull myself together when I was at work. And then going home, I would literally sit at the bottom of the shower in tears because that's the point it had gotten to. And then obviously for me, I developed the major depressive disorder and the agoraphobia. So I just couldn't get out of bed. Like I had, and this was so unusual for me. People who know me know probably two things about when my bathing is that one, I like my showers really, really hot. And two, I bathe multiple times a day, at least 2 times, sometimes 3 times in summer. During the worst of my trauma, I couldn't even shower. There were days where I would go without showering to the point where I was like, okay, I can't even stand myself anymore. I'll go and have a shower. But I just had a complete lack of wanting to do anything for myself, like lying in bed feeling like this is it. Like, what is life worth living for? I also didn't feel safe. So it wasn't just the fact of getting out of bed, it was actually leaving my house. Like, there were times where I just did not want to socialize at all. And it took every amount of effort to, drag myself to the shops if I needed to. And it was always with my husband. Like, I couldn't do it on my own. I would never go anywhere on my own. The next thing that comes along is changes in physical and emotional reactions. And this is things like being startled, having trouble sleeping, any irritability, and the kind of self-destructive behavior. Now, for me, obviously with the trouble sleeping, the insomnia, the night terrors, the nightmares, these were huge for me. Like they were a really big part of my whole traumatic experience. The other thing I noticed is that I became hypervigilant, and the safety issue and the hypervigilance kind of went together, because when it came to locking doors, locking car doors, checking over my shoulder, not wanting my back to doors, all those types of things, I just became even more aware and more alert, and it was almost like obsessive compulsive, like those types of behaviors started to creep in. As a result of that, I also became extremely angry, frustrated, and agitated. Like, as a general rule, I suffer from misophonia, which is where you get irritated by small noises. So things like people chewing with their mouths open, pens clicking, those irritable little noises that just don't stop. Imagine that being amplified like 100% or 1,000%. Like I literally drove my family nuts because, and especially my husband, because he was the one living with me at the time, that I would just get pissed off at the simplest of things. Frustration is part of my human design, and it's when I'm not in alignment. So my not self theme is to be frustrated. So that's not uncommon for me to when I know I'm out of alignment. But when the frustration leads to anger and you have these violent, angry outbursts where I wasn't necessarily physical, I didn't, throw anything, punch anything, but verbally, I would just scream and yell and get really, really angry. And I really do feel for my husband during that period. Physically, this showed up in the form of migraines and eczema flare ups. So, migraines I'd always suffered from previously, but I'd kind of learnt to live with them, and drinking really good quality water with my Kangen water, I noticed that over time my migraines were disappearing. However, they started coming back, and I could have a headache, which I often related to the, fact that I was having really bad sleep. So then I'd end up with a headache or a migraine the next day, but they were more frequent than what they had been. The other thing was that I experienced dyshydrotic eczema on my feet, and these flare-ups would actually get to the point where I couldn't put on a shoe, let alone my work boot. And this was happening before I had my breakdown. So I would end up like having a day off work or a couple of days off work because my eczema would flare up and I couldn't put on a work boot. And so I couldn't go to work in that situation. But then even once I went on to stress leave and wasn't at work, I still struggled on some days to be able to put on a closed-in shoe because my eczema flare-ups. And they were really bad. Probably the worst physical thing for me was the weight gain, because I gained nearly 20 kilos. So obviously, not every copper out there is, fit and fantastic for the whole time in their career, but I felt I was reasonably okay. Like I got married in 2020 and I was reasonably fit and healthy, and less than like 12 months later, I had gained like probably 10 kilos. And then once I went on stress leave and almost like the agoraphobia set in and the major depressive order settled in, because I also emotionally eat, is that I gained another 10 kilos. So overall, I gained 20 kilos. And so then when you're starting to look in the mirror and you're seeing this weight gain, nothing fits, nothing looks good, you then start to feel even more shit about yourself. So during that whole time of everything I was experiencing, I was under the care of a psychiatrist. And because I didn't want to be medicated, I was admitted to a psychiatric facility as an outpatient for cognitive behavior therapy. And I then continued on with this with my psychologist for around 2 years, doing further CBT work as well as exposure therapy. And the exposure therapy was related to phones. Unfortunately for me, it didn't really work because I still cannot have my phone with a ringtone. It can only be on silent. And depending on the ringtone that is on people's phones around me, I can freak out with a ringing phone, which is not great. But some of the other exposure therapy to do with the hypervigilance alleviated the problem a little bit, but not entirely. I also, because of my situation with WA Police, I had to have fortnightly appointments with my doctor. But for me, this was actually really good because I felt like I had this person checking in on me and also becoming accountable over time as to how I was actually going. Because she would kind of say, look, this is how you were a fortnight ago, how are you doing now? Or things like that. So I started to become a little bit more self-aware and accountable for my own actions and behavior as I went on. To this day, 4 years on, I have still never taken any medication for depression or anxiety because I believed it was a band-aid fix for me. Now, I know that's not for everybody, and I'm not saying to those who need it, don't go take medications. But for me, this was a road I didn't want to go down. I still to this date, apart from a period in 2021, the very beginning of 2021, I had a spider bite and took some antibiotics for that. Since then, I have not taken any allopathic medication at all. No Panadol, Nurofen, aspirin, antibiotics, nothing. I literally am medication kind of free. I do I used quite a bit during my healing journey, but continue to use some of them, a variety of modalities to support my healing journey. So one of the things I did was deep self-hypnosis, and I honestly didn't know how this would go, especially hypnotizing yourself. However, I found these sessions really, really therapeutic. It allowed me to go inwards. It allowed me to explore my feelings and emotions almost from like a third person perspective, because you're almost like it's almost like an out of body experience. I know that's a bit woo for some people, but it was a real way for me to get deep into what I was going through. And I found that really good. I had an amazing therapist from overseas. We used to have Zoom calls. She used to guide me through them until the point where I could guide myself. And that was really quite incredible. One of the things that I had and still do is kinesiology. I try to see my kinesiologist in Perth on a regular basis. But I found that really good because your body, again, some people will think it's really woo, but kinesiology is based on muscle reflex. And so your body remembers certain things at certain points in time, and the kinesiologist is able to almost access that muscle reflexology. And so you can go back and remember and deal with certain aspects of whatever comes up in that session. And I love going to my kinesiologist because I feel like I'm still continuing to learn about various aspects of my life, not just from my period with WA police and the trauma that it caused, but going right back in time to early childhood as well, and resolving a lot of other issues that sometimes underpin the current trauma as well. One of the biggest things that I experienced and focused on was breath work. Now, while I would love to do one of the really big, like whole day breath work workshops, the stuff that I did was on a smaller basis, only like half an hour or an hour at a time. But just being able to focus on my breath, focus on the here and now, become present with my own body and what my body was experiencing is so invaluable. It's something everybody should do. Everybody should get in touch with how important their breath is and being in control of their breath, like being able to look at whether you're deep breathing or shallow breathing, being able to take those really big, long inhales and exhales, being able to hold your breath and be okay with that. Like there are just so many levels of breath work, and that you can do those in an instant. Like in the instances of anxiety attacks, you can actually use breath work to bring you back to the here and now in a few moments. And that's probably one of my biggest go-tos. Meditation is also extremely important. For me, just being able to sit as a person who is constantly doing, like I know we're human beings, but I'm a person who is constantly do. I'm always up to something. My mind is always going. And during my healing journey, I did spend a lot of time going to the float tanks because I found that meditation for me was really magical while I was inside a float tank. Like that 45 minutes was an incredible period, like to do that. Unfortunately, I don't have that access anymore, and I've had to learn to meditate on my own. But being able to sit in silence and stillness with nothing but just your breath and to focus and just be in the moment is really important. And I try to do at least a 5 minute every day with a longer meditation session a couple of times a week on a regular basis. The talk therapy for me with a psychologist, it was great in the beginning to vent and to assess everything that had gone on for you and to kind of verbalize it to a neutral third party. But for me, over time, what I discovered for myself was that I hated being stuck in the past. I hated going back explaining how I felt back then, how it was back then. And I felt like I was almost in this hamster wheel of like, I want to get better. I don't want to be stuck here talking in the past. So rather than do that, I now use the assistance of a coach. I know I am a coach, but any good practitioner of any sort, whether you are, working in that field of counseling and coaching, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're an accountant, you will have a mentor of some level of expertise that you go to help you in your growth and your journey. So for me, having my own coach, I'm able to then delve more into like, how am I setting up my future? What is on next for me? How do I stay in the positive so I don't have to go back and keep rehashing and reliving the past? The other big thing for me, which is still prevalent today, was going into art therapy, being able to channel your energy into something positive, such as art. Now, that can take on a number of different forms. And for me, it has been macrame, it has been mandala drawing and tangles, and it has been painting. And I still do those three activities, not as much macrame, not as much painting, but the drawing, it's nothing for me to sit down when I'm feeling overwhelmed, anxious, in a bit of a mental state and pull out a clean sheet of paper, a compass, a protractor, a marker, and just draw. And let all my creativity and all my nervous energy come out on the paper. And for me, doing that, it always regulates my nervous system in a way that almost like nothing else can. Even if you do breath work or meditation, for me, at the end of it, there is nothing to show. I like to see some kind of progress. So being able to sit down and create something and see the finished product is very therapeutic. And at the moment, living where I do and having access to an art and craft community, being able to create once a week and have this regimented routine of going to that makes a big difference in my life, because I feel like I can adjust my calendar and flex things around according to what's going on. But where possible, I will always attend my art and craft group, because that art therapy is like my weekly therapy, and it costs me nothing other than whatever I'm using to create. So for me, that's magic. The biggest change for me and healing journey for me out of my entire process over the last few years was definitely to hike the Bibbulmun Track. Now, I have a book about that. I have a podcast episode about that. I've appeared on other podcasts talking about that. It, for me, was like the ultimate medication healing journey I could ever have gone on. Being out in nature and being on my own, having to account for myself, doing everything myself, was pure magic. There is no other way to describe it, because I do not think I would be sitting here today had I not experienced that. So everything that I did has basically taken me through that whole trauma journey of how I somewhat recovered. And with post-traumatic stress, I don't think anybody who has experienced it themselves would say that they ever fully recover. What you do is you lessen the symptoms and you are able to self-regulate more so that you, one, acknowledge your triggers, two, can work through those triggers, and three, be able to fill your toolkit or your resource box with everything you need to be able to do that and to be able to survive and thrive every single day. Like that, it doesn't have to become a matter of survival anymore, that you get to go and live your life knowing that everything that happened to you in the past has happened for you, and that you can go on and live bigger and better lives as a result. So, how it looks now, some 3 to 4 years after me going through this traumatic experience, is I still experience some of the hypervigilance where I'm out with other people, even though I may trust them. I find myself with my back to the door, with my back to a wall so that I can see the door when we're in public, because I like to be able to assess and see where I am. I cannot sit with my back to the door unless I'm with my husband. If my husband is with me, he normally takes that role, typical cop thing. But for me, I feel safe with him and that he will have my back regardless. So I'm okay with that. I still often double check that I've locked the front door or locked my car door when I go anywhere. It's kind of one of those things that I'm not as bad as I used to. I used to double, triple check like every single time. Now I just catch myself doing it every so often, and it's like, it's okay, Trudy. You don't need to check it. It's already locked. And it's having those little conversations with myself and being able to walk away knowing that I don't have to check it again. It's also the hypervigilance of like when my hubby goes to work, I'm still a little bit anxious and he'll often find me awake when he comes home from afternoon shift, because it's almost like that click in the door that he's home, that I'm like, okay, cool, he's safe, I can go to sleep now. That doesn't happen every shift, but it happens more frequently than I would actually like. In saying that, I also still suffer a little bit with insomnia. And again, that tends to follow the pattern of his work. But then there are other nights where hubby will go to bed and I'll still be awake. And I literally cannot close my eyes. It takes me ages. And sometimes I have to almost go through my sleep routine or my bedtime routine twice to be able to actually settle me into this rhythm where, okay, I'm ready to go to sleep now. It's okay. I feel safe enough. I feel comfortable enough that I can shut my eyes. The nightmares are less, and I've done a lot of work around that. One particular nightmare, I don't have at all anymore. The others I still have, but on a way less frequent basis, which for me is a good thing. There's also this lack of trust in other people, and I'm very wary around new people especially, and even the ability to be able to go back to work. Like if I wasn't coaching, the idea of going back into any kind of work environment where I had to see people on a regular basis and put my trust in them and trust them to do stuff for me is actually really hard. And it's something I didn't quite expect, and it's probably been one of the hardest things to overcome. Being in public is still often awkward. Being around big public events, I would love to go back to a footy game with my dad or my sister at Optus Stadium, but just being in with that amount of people makes me feel incredibly uncomfortable. Attending my recent resignation dinner with the WA Police Union, that wasn't as bad. I felt like I was safe. My husband was with me. I was in a room with a bunch of retiring police officers. I that was about 100, 150 people. I didn't feel too bad in that situation. But going into the thousands of people, that's a whole different ball game. Even going shopping, I can go to shops if I know where I have to go and what I have to get. So I live in a small community. I prefer to go to Geraldton, which is our closest city centre, with my husband, and I will more often choose days where we go together than going alone. However, I have been able to go alone, but that's going to specific places to get specific items, and I'm in and out. I know the access way in, I know the access way out. I park my car in a relatively same position. Even when I go to Perth and I go to the little nail salon where I get my nails done, it's in a big shopping centre, and I used to love that shopping centre and have grown up in that shopping centre throughout part of my childhood. But now it is literally park at the closest park, go in the same entrance, go down the same escalator, walk directly to that salon, and then do the reverse to get out back to my car. Like, it is so specific that, yeah, online shopping has become a necessary evil. As I said, insomnia is still a constant battle, especially when hubby is on afternoon shift. And one of the things that I have to do during that time is really amp up my self-care. So things like bubble baths, watching rom-coms, reading romance novels, doing longer meditations, anything to divert my attention away from the negative, I try to focus on so that I'm getting the best case possible to have a good night's sleep, or to help me take the focus off the fact that hubby isn't at home, he's at work. And look, we live in the world we live in where my husband is still a serving police officer, and that's something I have to deal with. He loves his career at the moment, so I can't change that just because of how I feel. It's finding ways to create balance and harmony and regulate your nervous system inside of that. So having all these resources and knowing how I react to certain situations is really important in being able to do that. Occasionally, I still get major flare-ups of my eczema where I still can't wear my shoes, and that has been recent, obviously, with the passing of my dog at the beginning of March. She was my best friend. She literally lay with me, stayed by my side the entire time I went through like my major depressive period and the agoraphobia. So to lose her was like losing a best friend. And the stress on my nervous system and my body means that how that's shown up is my eczema. And it's been something I've had to deal with, especially because it's meant that I've had to basically sack my personal trainer because I can't do exercise. I can't show up into the gym, or I can't go walking on a regular basis because my eczema has been so bad. So trying to do alternatives is been a real struggle, and that's also then contributing to the whole weight loss game, which doesn't help when you're also going through perimenopause, and many of the women out there going through the same will totally relate, no doubt. But it's just almost like there's, one thing shows up which then causes another thing, and you're in this constant toing and froing, pushing and pulling of circumstances. But switching to that, the positives of going through this trauma healing is that I love to hike when I can put my shoes on, and I feel really safe to do so. There is something about being out in nature that I feel totally at peace, total calm, total serenity, and it's a place that I really love. And I will hike where I get the chance. Like last year I did the Cape to Cape. Next year I'm planning to do the bib track again in reverse, and I will try to do nature walks where possible. It's not always possible where I live in a farming community, but if I go away, I try to do a beach hike, I try to do a bushwalk. just to be able to get out into nature because it's the one thing that I do love. I can also now talk about this stuff without the overwhelm of emotions. There are certain things I've spoken about on the podcast and in my book that I would never have been able to talk about without any sort of like reaction, whether that's tears or angry outbursts. I feel like I can actually calmly and with some level of control be able to talk about certain situations. Don't get me wrong, the really emotional stuff will still bring up emotions, and I'm okay with that. But the fact that I can actually talk about it has been a huge positive because the reactiveness has been taken away, and the more I do that, the less impact it has on me long term. So, in summary, the daily things that I do to wake up each day with a fresh start is to have like my morning routine. And that consists of waking up, lying there in the dark and having and saying my daily gratitudes. Sometimes I write them down, but most times I just lie there basically thanking the universe for another day. I get up, I get ready, and before I would just basically throw on whatever and not care about my hair, makeup, clothing because I was at home. I actually now get ready for whatever the day is going to bring. And I feel like that little bit of control in the morning and presenting myself ready for the world is one coping mechanism I have that, yes, I've done this much, today's going to go okay. And then I finish off by having my cacao, whether that's my iced cacao in the hotter months or my warm cacao in the cooler months. But just doing the daily gratitudes, getting ready and having my cacao, having that mini morning routine for me is enough to set up my day to start in a good way. I commit to doing my breath work and meditations, whether that's throughout the day or at set times during the week. Just being able to keep up those practices and keep learning those practices to go deeper is really beneficial for me. Where I can, I'm still doing daily walks. I love, now that it's cooler, I can start to get out in the morning again and do those morning walks, watching the sunrise, getting those first rays of sunshine on my face and doing that. Or again in the early evenings when the sun is setting. It's such a magical part of the day, morning or evening, to get out and do a walk. I still, as I mentioned previously, don't take any medication, and in fact, low tox living has become a priority and the way I live my life. This is everything from the water I consume. I've erased most toxic chemicals from my house. The products I put on my skin primarily are mostly natural. Things like washing powders and things, like I try to live holistically as possible to give myself the best possible chance of regulating my nervous system, of keeping in touch with what my body does and how it reacts, and live the healthiest possible life I can. And then the other big thing for me is having a support network. You need good people around you to help you recover in any situation. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, it takes some kind of traumatic event, whether that be a death or a medical diagnosis or a mental health incident, for people to actually come together and find out who their real friends are, who their people are around them that really honestly have their back. And I'm not just talking like the social media stuff and the people that are there, like I'm talking your ride or die people that you know that you can call at any time of the day or night, you can vent to, you can rant to, you can actually just share experiences with. Like they're your go-to people, and having those people in your corner makes a world of difference. And at the end of the day, doing this podcast is also making a difference to my life. The fact that I get to, one, share my story in the hope that other listeners can take something from my story and apply it to their lives. But for me, the greater joy comes from actually sharing other people's stories. When my guests come onto the show, I feel like I provide a safe clearing for them to be able to step into their story, because for a lot of guests that come onto my show, it is a first time experience for them. Often it is the first time of them ever telling their story in a public forum. And the fact that they've chosen me to do that in this space, I'm just so proud that other people's everyday warrior moments I get to bring to the world, and the ripple effect that creates in the community. I've always said, even when I was policing, if I can just make a difference to one person every single day, it is not just that one person you make a difference with. It is the ripple effect that extends into their communities, in their family, their friends, their networks, their working environments. There is that ripple effect that goes out. And if we could all just lead with more love and kindness on a daily basis, then that ripple effect goes out into the world. And we are all here to live this one life we've been gifted with. And we don't get second chances. We have to make the most of every single day we are blessed to be here on this earth. And I'm just proud and honored that I am here to live this life and to experience new beginnings every single day. Thank you for tuning in to the Everyday Warriors podcast. If you have an idea for a future episode or a story you'd like to share yourself, then please reach out and message me, as I am always up for real, raw, and authentic conversations with other everyday warriors. Also, be sure to subscribe so that you can download all the latest episodes as they are published, and spread the word to your family and friends and colleagues so they can listen in too. If you're sharing on social media, please be sure to tag me so that I can personally acknowledge you. I'm always open to comment about how these episodes have resonated with you, the listener. And remember, lead with love as you live this one wild and precious life.